This is the first meeting of the Corte Madera Climate Action Committee, so we might be a little ragged tonight. And we haven't elected a chair and vice chair, but in the interim, we asked the new committee member, Leslie Alden, to perform those duties, if you would, on a temporary basis. Press the button and see a green light, I believe.
There you go. I'm happy to do this temporarily, and you may have to prompt me to get me through all of the protocol.
And vice versa. Okay, so the first order of business is to call the meeting to order and salute the flag.
I hereby call the meeting to order.
America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Very good. Now we'll make you official.
Okay, welcome, new committee members. If you could rise and recite the oath of office after I do it, we'll swear you all in at the same time. Did Martin join on as an attendee yet?
Martin is, yes.
Okay, let's get him in the meeting, and I'll have him do his oath as well if he's there.
Okay.
Is he on the panelist side?
He is an attendee,
Okay.
and says asked to unmute. Okay. I see.
Oh, Amy as well.
Very good.
Just bear with us a moment when we're getting an additional committee member into the meeting. Does it look like they're migrating?
Do you want me to stop sharing the screen?
Oh, yes, briefly, that would be helpful. See if we can see them.
Let's see.
There he is.
All right.
Great.
Hello.
Hello, thank you for joining us remotely. Since we have you, I'll go ahead and do your oath at the same time as well. I don't know if there will be a delay, but I'm going to read parts of it out loud, and you can just recite your responses in line with the other 4 members who are present. Does that work?
Yes.
All right, here we go. I state your name.
I, Martin Wall,
Do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
that I take this obligation freely without any evasion of purpose or I forgot that bit.
sorry, you're at a disadvantage. They're reading it in front of them. And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Great, thank you, and congratulations, and thank you for your volunteer service.
Very good.
So we are moving on to item number 3, public comment. Is there anyone, do you have anyone on email or?
No, there's nobody on Zoom that is an
Okay.
attendee, so no,
We'll move.
and no one in the audience.
Let me go ahead and check that.
Oh, Amy Ackerman, our lawyer.
Oh, that's our town poll. No, we're not receiving any more public comment.
Okay, hearing no public comment, we'll move on to number 4, where we get to welcome Adam, and I guess you get to welcome us.
Exactly. No, it's an exciting day. I feel like we're starting something together. So this is my first day as interim town manager. So my name is Adam Wolf. I think I know many of you, several of you pretty well. Hildy and Phil, we've had many conversations over the years. And Leslie, I know you've participated in many town council meetings and have been really a leader in climate action for the town over many years now. And so I'm just really want to welcome all of you and Martin. Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting to look on the screen, but I really, and Meredith, all of you and the others that are not here this evening, just welcome you. This is obviously really, it's taken a lot of work and effort to get to this point. So it is really a celebration. It's official. This is now a climate action committee really focused on important work and urgent work. And so it's my honor really to welcome you into the family of town of Corte Madera committees and official committees, and really look forward to working with you. And I know you're all going to bring great recommendations and thoughts and ideas and policies to the town council and ultimately into our community. So thank you.
And if I may just briefly say congratulations to you officially. And Rebecca, this group, we've been working together for a couple of years now and worked with staff and worked with you, Adam. You've been such a great support and wise words. And Bob Brown, thank you for the last several months where you've been working with this ad hoc committee. Now that we're official, I'm really glad that you're still here with us. So anyway, I think we're all looking forward to, really getting things rolling. It's been a great experience, I think, for everyone over the last couple of years, but it's now really time to light the fire, not literally, of course, but to really get rolling on some true leadership on climate action. So thank you all. Thanks, staff, and thank you, Bob.
Yeah, and I also want to thank Bob as well. And I think just for helping us get to this point in the last year or so, really been helpful for staff. And as you know, last night, the town council also had the first reading of a new job description and position that we will be soon sending out and advertising for candidates. So as a climate action and adaptation coordinator.
So I thought we might take a couple of minutes. I've asked each of you to sort of prepare a quick introduction of yourselves as part of a get to know one another for our first meeting. So maybe we start with Hildy with the green button or the button to turn on the green light. Sorry.
There you go.
Perfect.
My name is Hildy Simon. No relation to Phil Simon. I have been living in Corte Madera in the same house for 44 years. I've seen a lot of changes, and prior to that, I grew up on the other side of Ring Mountain, where in the 1950s, where butterflies and wildlife was readily abundant. And now here I am, 60 years later, and it's all changed. There aren't as many butterflies. There's not as many bees. I had a butterfly collection when I was 8. That is would be hard for any child to reproduce now, and it makes me sad. It makes me wonder how we can change. And I'm coming at greenhouse emissions and climate control from a botanical viewpoint and an environmental viewpoint. I think biodiversity can really play a big part in reducing waste. And also, I think it would be a great way to get our citizens involved to introduce the idea of urban wildlife corridors, where we could somehow encourage people to plant islands of milkweed and islands of pipevine and islands of buckwheat that can help butterflies get from one side of 101 to the other. So I don't know. I don't know how to do that, but I think it's a good idea.
Thank you. Meredith? Hilda, you can turn off your mic.
I'm Meredith Foster. I'm a rising senior at St. Ignatius High School in San Francisco. And I've been part of the, ad hoc committee since it started in 2020. And so I'm very excited to still be a part of it, because these past couple of years, it's been a really meaningful way to, translate my care and concern for the environment and for climate action into real engagement with the community. I've specifically been involved with working with students from the local schools. This past spring, I started a student climate action group, Climate Ambassadors, and I helped them create projects that channeled their care and concern into projects that communicated and engaged fellow students, adults, families. It was really exciting to see that come into fruition. And I'm really excited to continue to expand my work with the students, as well as support all the work that this amazing committee is doing. And big thanks to all of the town staff who have supported it along the way and made it so official today. So I'm very excited to be here.
I'm Leslie Alden. Born and raised in San Francisco, but went to high school in San Rafael and have lived in Corte Madera for 40 years. We had a conversation about my math and dates on the way over. I've worked in the nonprofit world, the private sector as well, and I was with the County of Marin for 13 and a half years, and very much focused on policy, environmental policy, energy policy, including building ordinances and so much more. Part of the countywide climate plan that was passed in 2007. So I was also part of the group, a large group. I played a minor role, but I worked for Supervisor Charles McGlashan, and part of that group started the first community choice aggregation program in the state of California. Started as Marin Clean Energy, it's now MCE Clean Energy. And that was a real paradigm shift for the state, and it was a career shift for me personally to get much more engaged on climate solutions. And when I left the county a couple of years ago, I started a nonprofit, Drawdown Bay Area, which is entirely focused on solutions and the nexus of business, government, and civil society, and focused on what we can actually accomplish here in the Bay Area. And the work here with this local small town commission or committee really feeds into that sort of my on the ground truthiness to really go through this process here and see how that translates to other communities around the Bay. So I'm really happy that Meredith is back, that Martin's with us, and David Johnston and Amy Ruiz have been such great partners in this. So I'm very much with Meredith, really looking forward to moving this forward and getting some things done here in Corte Madera. It's really wonderful to see Corte Madera take this leadership role, because when we launched MCE, Marin Clean Energy, back in 2010, Corte Madera was the last town to sign on. And that was a couple of years later. So I was just so disappointed. It was sort of like, okay, well, maybe we saved the best for last. But it's nice to be seeing us really we've shifted as a community and we're taking a leadership role. So I'm really excited as well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Phil Simon. No known relationship to Hilda Simon. It's ironic that we both grew up at the base of Ring Mountain. I grew up on this side, and I still live on the same property where I was born. It's exciting to meet such a energetic group and to try to be part of looking to change things in people's awareness of climate change, which is, although people are aware, they don't seem to be involved. And so I would like to get involved in this. I spent most of my career as a builder. I built commercial buildings and residential buildings in Washington, Alaska, and California. I'm still a general contractor. I'm not really practicing anymore, but I renew that license every time it comes around, just in case something exciting happens. I lived at and worked at Sea Ranch for quite a while, which is where I kind of got some inspiration behind the planners there, and Larry Halpin was the progenitor of that concept of living lightly on the land, which we were living lightly on the land because others were living heavily on it, I think. But nonetheless, it gave me some background into how to think about how we live our lives with respect to houses, not just building them. And one thing I think I can offer some insight to is into how Corte Madera has changed over time and what it may look like in the future, and add some expertise in the construction area if that comes to pass. I'm also concerned about people coming up to speed with breaking old habits of not bringing a bag to the grocery store, of not composting, simple things that can change and kind of add some light to them where they can feel like they're empowered to and part of the change, not just aware of the change. So I'm really looking forward to interacting with you guys.
Thank you. And Martin? You there?
I'm unmuting. It's great to hear all these, the background again. So I'm Martin Wall. A little background on me is I currently work part-time with Lee Enterprises Consulting, serving the biofuels and biochemical industries. I help them assess the project suitability and investment potential, including identifying federal funding programs. I've been involved with alternative fuels for more than 15 years, starting with a biodiesel company in the Bay Area, and then maintaining a biofuel production plant database for Genscape, a global energy monitoring firm. Previously, I worked for a variety of data product development, marketing, and management companies. And my expertise and talents are in the areas of communicating technical aspects to non-technical audiences, formulating marketing approaches, and managing projects. I'm focused on thoroughly researching and accurately articulating solutions to the variety of challenges we face to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There's a lot of complex technical things that need to be digested and explained meaningfully to people who don't spend all day thinking about this kind of thing. So that's where I like to apply my talents. I've served on the temporary Climate Action Committee since its inception, supporting all efforts of the committee, and had been especially involved with the Transportation Electric Vehicle Initiative, and I developed the committee's articles for the Corte Madera Chronicles. recently and you can tell I'm not with you all in person, but in spirit. We've been spending summer months in New Hampshire to be closer to family members, but we are residents and spiritually linked to California and Corte Madera, having lived there since 1997. By the way, the 6-article series that I developed for the Chronicles, the Electric Vehicle Myths Busted series, I got in touch with the Green Energy Times here in the Northeast, and they're going to publish it as a lead article in their August edition. So I'm very pleased that I can help spread the word across the continent. Should be great. I'll send you links to that when it's published. I'm passionate about green energy in general and greenhouse gas reduction in particular, and it's been an honor to serve with the members of the committee so far, and I'm looking forward to supporting our future efforts and working with Hildy and Phil. I'm delighted to have a GC on board. I think that the electrification of buildings component is going to be a significant task for us to undertake, and having that kind of expertise and the longevity of your and Hilda's residency and experience in Corte Madera is going to be a big benefit. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, next up we have election of chair and vice chair. We're missing 2 members today, and you don't know one another well. So like we can go forward and.
I think we should nominate the 2 people who aren't here. I might make sense though to table that, or I'm happy to serve as an interim vice chair until the next meeting, but I think it might make sense to wait until we have everyone together.
Seem okay, Rebecca? Okay, then we'll table that item. Okay. And then next we have Amy up. Amy, can you share your screen and unmute?
Just a sec here to get set up.
So this will be a presentation on the Brown Act and policies applicable to boards.
While we're waiting, after Martin's introduction and his last statements, I thought it would be, the timing was really excellent as well to introduce Chris Ragland, our chief building official as well, walked in the door. So just wanted to introduce him. You'll probably be speaking to him in the near future, about that very issue that Martin was discussing. So thought I just.
Amy, are you ready to queue up?
Can you see my screen?
No, not yet. Now we will in a moment. There we go.
All right. Let's see. Okay. All right. Let me just get started. Welcome, everyone. My name's Amy Ackerman. I'm the town attorney for Corte Madera. Really excited to be here. It's really momentous. I do work with other cities, and it's very fun to see how forward-thinking Corte Madera is, and how much leadership you're showing on this issue. So I'm really excited. So I'm going to talk about just some of the policies that apply to the committee. We'll go over the Brown Act and just a quick notes about the Public Records Act. So just to begin with, you're serving on a town committee. So it's a position of public trust, and you need to act accordingly. You are granted specific powers and duties by the council, and you need to stay within those powers and duties. And your main role is an advisory role to the city council. And just to recap, your duties are kind of in 4 categories. One is advising the council and on all things related to the climate action plan. So you're to make recommendations to council for implementation. You're to monitor implementation, and you're to report back to council on implementation. You also can make recommendations to council regarding emissions reduction strategies and other strategies related to climate change. And then at the direction of council, make recommendations re-updating the cap. So I'll probably, after you are reporting on implementation, council will ask you for some specific suggestions about updates. You also can make recommendations to the various town boards and commissions, which includes the Planning Commission, pertaining to CAP and sustainable practices. The town is very much looking forward to you working on community education and outreach, both to individuals and to businesses about the CAP and various climate adaptation measures. And then when council so directs, assist the town in participating in regional climate change efforts. So those are the tasks that council has delegated to you. And I think you have a lot of work cut out for you. Okay, I want to talk briefly about the Brown Act, which is the laws that govern the meetings of legislative bodies. So we'll go over just briefly what's a legislative body, what's a meeting, the basic notice and agenda, public comment. I'm going to touch on closed sessions, but I don't think you'll have any, and enforcement. So just the first thing I always like to start with is, why do we have the Brown Act? It's a bunch of rules and it doesn't seem very efficient. So what's the deal? So in 1951, I believe, in the early 50s, ace reporter Mike Harris, who I always think looks a little like Kramer in Seinfeld, he did a 10-part series on your secret government. Remember back in the day, when newspapers would do a multi-part series, well, he did a 10-parter, and lo and behold, he discovered that all kinds of secret meetings were going on in councils, and like the public was being completely shut out of all kinds of governance. At the time, it was believed the state legislature was more open and state bodies were more open, but they later got their act. So based on this, there was Ralph M. Brown. He was a Modesto assembly member, said, hey, we need to change how this is. We need to open up meetings so the public understands what's going on. So this is what the legislature declared in passing the Brown Act. Public commissions, boards, councils, and other public agencies exist to aid in the conduct of people's business. It's the intent that their actions be taken openly and their deliberations be conducted openly. So when you think about why we have all these rules, if you remember that the whole point is so local government's actions are transparent and that the public's entitled to watch them and participate by making comments, some of these rules begin to make more sense. So the Brown Act applies to legislative bodies. That's the kind of umbrella term they use for councils, committees, boards, commissions. Doesn't matter what your title is, as long as it's multi-member. It is a very, very broad definition. It's any kind of multi-member body that's created by charter, ordinance, resolution, or formal action. So you guys were created by resolution of the city council. Therefore, you're a legislative body and you're subject to the Brown Act. So the thing to remember is, and this is why I have the penguins with their baby, is that legislative bodies create other legislative bodies. So if you create subcommittees, you've just had a baby legislative body. The exception to that are ad hoc committees. That means they can't have standing jurisdiction or a regular meeting schedule. An example of this might be city council when they are interested in conducting interviews for positions. They might have a ad hoc committee, 2 members, has to be less than a quorum to do interviews. So those very short-term bodies that are less than a quorum of your committee that don't meet all year round are not subject. But if you do create a standing committee, that's also a legislative body, and that committee will be subject to the requirements of the Brown Act. Okay, so we know who the Brown Act applies to. We're going to talk about meetings. It seems kind of stupid, but you'll find out that it's not always stupid. So what's a meeting? Well, this is the easy answer. A majority of you are together and you're discussing or taking action on whatever's within your subject matter jurisdiction. You're together, 4 of you are together, and you're discussing implementing the climate action plan. That's a meeting. They can happen. It doesn't matter if you're taking action or not. If you're discussing the meeting business, that's a meeting. If you're getting together before your meeting and you're discussing business, that's considered a meeting. Afterwards, it's a meeting. And what does that mean? That means the public has to be there. So the things that we worry about are seriatim meetings, and that's the term that's used when you are illegally meeting outside of a public meeting. So it can happen by telephone, it can happen by email, it can happen by social media or with a person. But if you end up with a majority of the people discussing business outside of a public meeting, that's a seriatim meeting. It's unlawful. You can't do it. Is it inefficient? Probably. But the legislature trades efficiency for transparency. So if you have a vote on something and you end up finding out how everybody votes outside of a meeting, you've taken the public out, and that's what the Brown Act doesn't want. So again, it can happen inadvertently, but a majority of members shouldn't be discussing business outside of a meeting. Now, the Brown Act has added some new social media restrictions, which, I'm going to say they're a little cumbersome, to put it kindly. So you are certainly welcome to engage on social media with any member of the public. There's no problem with that. But what the Brown Act says is you can't use an internet-based social media platform to discuss among yourselves something that's within your jurisdiction. Now, they were very, very broad about this because discussing among yourselves includes comments or use of digital icons that express reactions to communications. So if a majority of you like a comment that somebody posts about climate action, that is now prohibited under the Brown Act. So you can't respond to each other's comments. So if you're going to be friends on your social media and you post, don't comment, don't even like. Is it overkill? Perhaps, but it is the law, and that's what we're working on. Doesn't prohibit you from engaging with a member of the public, but you want to refrain from engaging in social media with your committee members. This has become, it's very prohibitive because, we're doing more work with listservs and so forth, but it does somewhat inhibit that kind of activity. So when can you get together, a majority of you, if you're not in a meeting as you are today? You can go to conferences, and turns out there's a majority of you. You can go to a local meeting open to the public. You can go to a social, recreational, ceremonial event, as long as you're not gathered in the corner with the majority of your committee discussing business. So you're fine if you find yourself, you attend similar events, just don't, a majority of you, discuss your business outside of, at that occasion. So I want to talk a little bit about teleconferencing. Back in the day before the pandemic, which has transformed our world, all meetings were in person. There was there was a way in which you could meet by teleconference, but the rules really required mini meetings at each teleconference site. You had to notice each location, you had to post an agenda at each location, and you had to allow the public at each location. Obviously, this was not a solution during the pandemic when the whole point was to not to isolate. So we are under AB 360. We had executive orders for the governor first, then the legislature passed a kind of messy and convoluted law, which is not particularly easy to interpret, called AB 361, which allows us now to do teleconference meetings without requiring a member of the public to go to your house. Now, the thing to remember about teleconference meetings is if you're not having a teleconference meeting, then the council members have to be in person and present. It doesn't prohibit staff or presentations from me or someone else who are remote. And we are using the AB 361 teleconference meeting requirements now to ensure so that we can allow people, even if you're meeting in person, if someone's exposed to COVID or has COVID and doesn't feel safe coming in person, we're allowing those council and committee members to attend remotely. I think we have another year to go under AB 361. We had hoped this year that the legislature was going to pass a new law that would allow us to integrate technology more fully into the Brown Act so we could have more flexibility in meetings. That didn't happen. Apparently the legislature is not keen on bringing us up to the year 2022. So we are under these restrictions, and we and Rebecca will keep you apprised when things change. But we think it's really important from a public health perspective is if you're exposed or there's a risk of exposure, we make sure we protect public health and allow people to participate remotely. Okay, so we know that you're a legislative body. We know what a meeting is. We know that you can't reach decisions outside of a meeting. We'll talk very briefly about kind of what I call the weeds of the Brown Act, notice and agendas. So basically, you have to have your notice and agenda prepared in advance. Why? Well, this makes sense. How does the public know what you're going to be talking about to decide if they want to participate or not? So regular meetings, you'll have a regular date and time for meeting. Your agendas need to be prepared and posted 72 hours in advance. Sometimes, council may need to do a special meeting. I think it's less likely that you will, but there is 24 hours notice for that. And you have to put what you're talking about on the agenda, usually 20 words or less. Basically, what's the point of the agenda? To let the public know what your business you're going to be transacting so they can decide, do I want to participate or not? Same for the committee. It lets you know what it is that you're going to be discussing and transacting. Now, why does it matter what's on your agenda? And this is a really key point of the Brown Act. If you don't have the item on the agenda, you can't discuss it or act on it. Why? Because the public will have no notice that you're taking this action. There are a couple of emergency exceptions that aren't going to come up for the committee. So that's why we make sure in advance we know what you want to talk about at your committee meeting. So we make sure it's on the agenda. There may be times like we just had where you have an item on the agenda and you're not going to be prepared to talk about it. That's fine. It can be continued. It can be tabled. But if it's not on the agenda at all, you can't act on it. Okay, so now we know that the Brown Act applies to you, when you can meet and how you meet and what you've got to do for your agendas and notice. We'll talk a little bit about public comment. Although you don't have any public today, I suspect once your meetings start, you will have public who want to comment. So there's sort of two kinds of public comment. The first is something that's required at every single meeting. You have to take public comment on every agenda item before action is taken or discussion is concluded. So you didn't have any public today, so we are going to make you ask for public comment when there's no public. But when your public starts attending at each item on the agenda, before the action, before you take final action, we'll ask for public comment. Then at regular meetings, which will be most of yours, you also have to allow kind of open public comment, general public comment. And that is a member of the public might want to say something to you about the climate action plan or the other areas that you that are within your jurisdiction, but maybe you don't have an item on the agenda specifically asked to that. Then during general public comment, they can make a public comment on that. It's a little harder to sort of see the distinction because you have pretty specific goals, but that's the time, like at a town council meeting, where someone might just comment on something that's not before council, but they want to let council know about it. So that's what we call the general public comment or open public comment. So you will be having an item on your agenda for open public comment, and then you'll also be taking public comment on each item on the agenda. Now, the Brown Act gives a fair amount of rights to the public. Right to equal time. When you have members of the public speak, you're going to want to allow each member to have the same amount of time, just kind of fundamental fairness. This part is the joys of public service. They have a right to criticize policies, procedures, programs, or services, or the acts or omissions of the committee. So they do have the right to criticize what it is you're doing. Just part of the fun of public service. You can limit public comment to up to 3 minutes and a certain total amount of time, but you can't treat people differently depending on what they're saying. That seems, pretty basic fairness. So again, you can do up to 3 minutes. If it were an item and you had a ton of people there, you could limit the total amount of time. Now, while members of the public have a right to comment, they don't have a right to dialogue or to respond. You can choose to respond if you'd like, but actually, particularly if it's general public comment and it's not on your agenda, you can't engage in a discussion because, of course, that would be discussing something not on the agenda. But it's perfectly fine to ask a follow-up question. Are you talking about this? Are you talking about that? It's also fine to say, hey, you bring up a good issue. Maybe we'll put that on the agenda for next meeting. All of that is fine. Engaging in dialogue, not fine. Okay, just for a moment, there are grounds, in case you're wondering, where you can have a closed session. I don't think that's going to apply to this committee. It's usually things where you're protecting someone's privacy rights, so personnel matters, or when the town's engaged in litigation. I don't see it happening for you, but if you have any question at all, feel free to contact Rebecca or to contact me. So penalties, are there penalties? There are. Someone can go to court and sue to prevent violations, to set aside actions. It's expensive for the town because if they win, they get attorney's fees. So that is really something that you don't want to engage in. It's also, you serve at the pleasure of council. And so if you were to violate it and become a problem to council, they'd simply remove you. So we do take these laws seriously because it's a matter of public trust and ensuring that you are being transparent to the public. I want to just take 2 or 3 slides to talk about the Public Records Act. So why do we have a Public Records Act? Because just like public meetings, public information is, the taxpayers pay for it. That public is a right to have information about the conduct of business. And so the Public Records Act is sort of similar to the Brown Act, as it gives public right to information. So you're going to have to consider that pretty much all writings related to committee business are open to the public. If the public requests a copy of something, they're going to be entitled to it. Not every single piece public record that the town has is subject to disclosure. There are some exceptions: attorney-client communications, personnel records, medical records, other things, most of which are not going to apply to this committee. So what I like to tell people is be judicious in what you put in writing. I recently had to review some documents for a client who shall not be named, and the mayor made a comment about, yes, he's a nasty piece of work about a citizen. That is an uncomfortable document to have to disclose. And so I recommend not putting that in writing. So be judicious with your writings. What's important is, public record, it's not just maybe something you're in town hall and you've got a record. It can apply to emails, and it doesn't matter if you send, or a text, doesn't matter if it comes from your personal phone versus a town issued phone. If it's related to town business, to your committee business, it's likely to be a public record. If in fact you get a Public Records Act request, let Rebecca know and we'll help you respond to it. But I just like to let people know that when you're engaging in the committee, many of the communications that you have, the documents you have in writing, are likely to be public. It's just good to know that. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope you survived it. And I am happy to take any questions that you have. Anybody have any questions? Okay.
Amy, this is David Johnson. I'm sorry that I missed the start of your presentation.
No problem.
Are we allowed to share an email amongst each other? For example, an email about a new water heater. Can we share information that's just about a trend in the industry?
Well, that's a really good question. And the answer to that is it's probably best if you send it to staff and staff sends it out, because staff is allowed to have communications. But what I like to say is, if you think of it as a one-way street, it's okay to share information. There's a news story about climate, there's a new heater, but you don't want to engage in discussions. So sending the information out is fine. If you find that you'd like to engage in it, how could this apply to our work? Then that should be agendized for a discussion in a meeting. So just kind of think of it mostly as a one-way street. I've got information, it might be helpful to people. And probably when you get your staff member, great to CC staff, because then it can just be part of committee record. But what you don't want to do is engage in discussions about whatever you send out. Because yes, often, this comes up often. People say there's a news story, there's something. So that's okay. CC staff, but don't start a dialogue. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great.
Just had to find my mute button.
I know.
Yep.
I know. Anybody else?
Yes, thank you. This is Leslie Alden. Thank you, Amy. I really appreciate this thorough overview. The one question that I brought up before, and I'll ask you directly, is we're certainly a committee of the council, but we're not the decision makers. We're an advisor. We have an advisory role. And to me, that seems sort of a different animal, because we're not handling the people's money. We have no access or need to have access to the general fund and are not making financial decisions. We're recommending perhaps policy decisions, but we're not actually deciding any policy decisions. So that's where I completely support the Brown Act. Absolutely, the public trust and transparency, of course, but it just feels like the constraints that are put on us to get to a point where we can efficiently be prepared to advise the council that this is a challenge. So I recognize that we need to follow these rules, but I do kind of want to put that on the record that this slows everybody down because we're not actually the deciders. So that's my only comment.
I completely understand where you're coming from, and I have heard this multiple times from pretty much every time I do a Brown Act presentation. But this is going to make it harder for us to do our job, and it is not efficient. I absolutely agree with you, but the legislature has made a determination that they're going to favor transparency over efficiency. And when you look at the definition of legislative bodies, the legislature says, we don't care if you're permanent or temporary, decision-making or advisory. You're subject to these laws. One thing that's interesting is, so the state equivalent of the Brown Act is called the Bagley-Keene Act. And they have slightly different rules, a little more lenient, I guess, for advisory bodies. But the legislature has not decided to do that for local government. And, I serve on the Brown Act Committee of League of Cities, and this is something we've discussed, is these rules make tons of sense for city councils, town councils, boards of supervisors, but wouldn't it make sense to have a lesser set of rules for advisory bodies? And so far, we just haven't been able to successfully make the case to the legislature. They seem to think when they amend the Brown Act that it's all city councils, it's all county boards, and they just forget. And this was vividly painted this year when we were trying to get some changes to allow for more flexibility for committees to meet remotely. The pitch was, hey, we have councils on aging, we have disability rights councils. It would be so much better for those members, and you would open up government to people who can't make it down in person to City Hall to have these meetings. We were not successful. League was not successful with those arguments. So I completely understand your frustration, but it is what it is, and you will learn ways to work within this. A couple of tips I can give you is, if you want to have a couple people, as long as it's less than a quorum, 2 members to work on this issue, 2 members to work on this issue, report back to the committee. 2 members can't take action because you need a majority to take action. So this is something where this is a tip for advisory members. As long as you come back, the discussion is engaged in at the committee where the public has a right to weigh in, you can do that. So there are ways to work within the Brown Act to help you get business done. And I am always happy to work with committees and councils to ensure compliance with the Brown Act, but to maximize your efficiency within those rules.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
that was a long answer.
Perfect. That was good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Do the meetings have to be recorded?
Um,
And is the recording always made public?
The Brown Act does not require meetings to be recorded, but if a meeting is recorded, it is going to be public. And I think that has a little bit more, whether it's recorded or not, is a little bit more up to town policy at this point. Yeah, so, but the Brown Act itself does not require.
Amy, it's Rebecca. I think when we did a resolution back in 2020 as a cost saving measure to save money on our verbatim minutes that we were doing, I think part of the staff report and the reasoning behind council directing council and all boards and commissions and committees to go to action item minutes was because the recording was made and available to the public, and therefore we did not need verbatim minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, the Brown Act does not address minutes, except for if you get in trouble and the court requires you to take minutes in closed sessions, which will never happens to Corte Madera. So that's really kind of more of a preference. I mean, people mostly take action minutes because you want a historical record of what happened with the council or even the committee. You'll want to keep a record of what your recommendations were and what your actions are. But I generally recommend that people do mostly action minutes because it really doesn't serve anyone to have verbatim minutes. Minutes are really your historical record of what actions were taken.
The questions?
Actually, that brings up something else. So if we're taking notes within our committee for a meeting, is that something that is a responsibility of someone on the committee or it's staff? Okay.
Yes.
All right, great. Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Amy. Really appreciate your input.
Thank you.
Try to stay within the bounds.
Yeah, I mean, it's awkward, but you know, Rebecca's an expert. You can always check in with her, and you know, I'm always available as well.
Thank you.
Now I need to share my screen. There. Did that
So our
work?
next agenda item is along the same lines, and really it's not for action tonight, but it's for your consideration for future agendas as to whether or not there are ad hoc subcommittees, as Amy indicated, that you may want to establish. Again, these will not be long-term, but task specific. For example, the working group was going to tackle revisions to the climate action website for the town. And so things like that, you should probably be thinking about now. In our next meeting, we can bring this up and see if there are subcommittees that we want to establish. And again, those are not a majority of the committee members, so they're a little freer in terms of the ability to dialogue and work in small groups. Okay, if we can move on then to item number 8. I know our time is running a little short, but we have Christine O'Rourke with us tonight. And Christine is the Sustainability Coordinator for the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership, which Corte Madera participates in, and she'll describe who they are. And she's also been the author of all of the climate action plans in Marin County, including Corte Madera. So she's going to fill us in on greenhouse gas emission inventory that's been completed and the cap itself, because that will be the basis of a lot of our work. So Christine, good evening.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. So I have a presentation to give, and I'm going to go through it fairly quickly because I know you want to get out of here by 6 o'clock. So let me share my presentation. Okay. I assume everybody can see that. So as Bob said, I'm Christine O'Rourke, Sustainability Coordinator for the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership. I'm also a planning consultant. I've done other work for Corte Madera. I'm working on your housing element right now, so I may look a little familiar to you. And so tonight I wanted to give you a very brief overview of the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership, and then talk about your greenhouse gas emissions inventory results for the calendar year 2020. It's hot off the presses. I just finished that up last week. Then also kind of do a pretty high level overview of the 2020 Climate Action Plan. I understand that it was your homework to read that plan, so I don't have to go through it in a lot of depth. And then I'm going to wrap up with some recommended near-term actions that I think the committee might want to consider for implementation, like over the next year. So MCEP has been around since 2007. That's 15 years. It's a partnership of all the Marin jurisdictions, plus MCE Clean Energy, the Transportation Authority of Marin, and the Marin Municipal Water District. It's a staff-driven organization. We do have a website at marinclimate.org, and we have a really cool tool called the Marin Tracker that you can access from our website as well. We work together to implement programs that are mutual in all of the climate action plans. We find that it's really cost-effective and efficient to do it that way. And every year we complete these annual community greenhouse gas emissions inventories. We also do municipal inventories just about every 5 years. We're a little late this time around because of COVID, so we've delayed it. And as Bob said, we also do climate action plans. So we've developed kind of a template, and every time a jurisdiction uses it, we update it and it morphs into something a little different. So, but you have one that was based on an original template. Oops. So so let me talk about, I'll give you your results for your greenhouse gas inventory first. And this inventory is an activity-based inventory, and that's in contrast to what we call a consumption-based inventory. So just so that you understand, we are measuring emissions, kind of a subset of all of the emissions that would be considered if you were doing like a carbon footprint of a household or of the entire town. So we're not looking at upstream emissions that come from mining, growing, producing, packaging, shipping, food and products. We're not including air travel. There was a consumption-based inventory that was commissioned by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District a few years ago, and that showed 47 metric tons per household. That's looking at the entire footprint. That's using 2013 data. Our 2020 data is now showing 19 metric tons per household. So you can see it's a subset of the entire household. Or the entire consumption-based inventory. The reason we don't do consumption-based inventories is because this data, it's a lot of it is based on modeling. And it's not updated every year. So we're really focusing on the emissions that we have data that we can quantify and that we can track, and we can measure our progress over each year. So what are we measuring? This is a look at the emissions by source and the relative contribution from each source. So transportation emissions is almost 3/4 of the emissions at this point in Corte Madera that are being generated by the community come from the transportation sector. This is including passenger cars, public transportation like buses, and commercial vehicles. And for the most part, particularly when we're talking about passenger vehicles, we're measuring vehicle miles traveled that are generated by trips that start and/or end in Corte Madera. The next largest sector is the built environment natural gas. So that's the consumption of natural gas in residential and non-residential buildings, and that's 19% of total emissions. The built environment electricity sector is actually pretty small. It used to be much larger, but as I'll show you in an upcoming slide, our electricity has been getting cleaner over the years. So now it only represents 4% of emissions. And then we have these other sectors as well. The waste sector, which is waste that's generated by residents, businesses in Corte Madera and disposed in a landfill. That represents 4% of emissions. And then we have these smaller sectors, off-road. That is emissions that come from the use of construction and lawn and garden equipment within the boundary of Corte Madera, and the water and wastewater sector, which is less than 1%. So I've got some slides. I'll drill down a little bit on these, but the big takeaway here is that because natural gas and transportation are together, what is that? I mean, that's a lot of the emissions, that those are really the ones that we need to focus on if we're going to meet our goals. So this is a look at emissions since 2005. That's when we started quantifying them. We don't have data that goes back to 1990. A lot of the state goals are couched in this 1990 level term. We estimate that at 15% below 2005 levels. So you can see that they're going down. Emissions are actually down 39% since 2005, and that's equivalent to 28% below the 1990 level. So the town actually has been making really good progress along this line. And I'll explain a little bit why you're kind of ahead of the rest of the Marin jurisdictions. So in the built environment electricity sector, again, this is 4% of community emissions. The blue bars, and this is going to be true for all the graphs I show you, the blue bars that's the activity. So this is showing kilowatt hours that the entire community is purchased electricity that's used in the community. And then the red line is the emissions. So you can compare the two. The emissions so the purchased electricity, just focusing on those blue bars, is down 32%, almost a third since 2005. A big reason for that was the closing of the Wind Cup plant. That happened around here 2011 to 2012. Like took them a little while to kind of as they were winding down their operations, is my understanding. So that was a big a drop from there. There's also been solar PV installations, so that reduces purchased electricity consumption. And then, of course, there's been some strides in energy efficiency and conservation. Now, the emissions are way down. They're down 67%. And so that's reflecting the carbon content of our electricity. Electricity is generated from a lot of different sources. It can be, we don't really use coal, but that would be the dirtiest. There's natural gas, which generates emissions. And then there's a lot of renewable and large hydroelectric as well that don't generate emissions. So as our electricity gets cleaner and starts using more renewable electricity sources in the power mix, the emissions go down. So that's why this sector really has shrunk quite a bit, only 4% of community-wide emissions. So the next sector I want to talk about, not quite sure why it's not moving forward, there we go, is natural gas. And this again is natural gas used in residential and non-residential buildings. It's down 51% since 2005. And that's quite a bit lower than all of the other marine jurisdictions. And again, that really is because of the closing of that Wind Cup plant back then in 2011 and 2012. There's other reasons why natural gas kind of fluctuates. It goes up and down. It's very dependent on the weather. So if you have a cold year, of course, your natural gas consumption is going to go up. Also, most likely it's hard to tease out exactly how much, but there probably has been some reduction in natural gas consumption just due to energy efficiency and improved conservation. So here we really see that there's a big opportunity to improve energy efficiency of buildings and convert natural gas appliances and systems to ones that use electricity, especially because our electricity is so clean. So if we are switching over to high efficiency heat pump heating systems rather than replacing natural gas, that ends up having a big impact on natural gas emissions and emissions overall. The next sector is transportation. And again, this is 72% of community emissions. So the blue bars here is showing vehicle miles traveled, and that really hasn't budged. It's only down 1% since 2005. The emissions have dropped and they're down about 20%. And that's really due to the fact that our cars are more fuel efficient. And also we are having more alternatively fueled cars, primarily electric vehicles. I think one of the important takeaways here is that, we all want more people to use alternative means of transportation, to bike and to walk rather than get in their cars. There's been a lot of effort over the years to do that, and it really hasn't had much impact on vehicle miles traveled. They're just not down. It's just not down that much. So here we really see that the big opportunity is to reduce emissions through adoption of electric vehicles. People are continuing to drive, so we need them to drive clean cars and power with clean electricity. The waste sector, again, a small sector, only 4%. Waste disposal has decreased 15% since 2005. You can see how this fluctuates. It really does depend on a lot of it about the economy. Really dropped off around 2008 when we had that last Great Recession, or the Great Recession, I should say. Don't want to make it sound like we'll have another one. Waste emissions are down 31%, and that is due to the lower organic content of the waste that's being disposed in the landfill. Also, this alternative daily cover, the landfill used to use green waste as daily cover and really doesn't use any green waste anymore. So, that a lot of that green waste is now being composted. So that's really helping with emissions. Here, the big opportunity is really because emissions come from the decomposition of organic waste. We really need to get that organic waste out of the landfill through composting, getting people and businesses to use their green cans. And then the last sector I wanted to look at is water. And this is a really tiny sector, but it's kind of interesting because, well, first of all, per capita water use has gone down 19% since 2005. And that's great. And we do assume in the climate action plan that we'll be able to continue to reduce water consumption. And that's really important because, of course, with climate change, we're more likely to have more droughts and there's going to be more pressure on our water resources. The emissions that come from water have dropped significantly, 96%. And that's because our water agencies, both MMWD and the Sonoma County Water Agency, which supplies about 20% of water to MMWD, they both use deep green or the Sonoma County equivalent of deep green in their operation. So that's why those emissions are way down. And yeah, reduce water use is very important just for the co-benefits. All right, so let's switch to the climate action plan. Your plan was updated in 2020, and it was kind of a quick update. It was a light update of the 2016 plan. But when I was going through it, it's really interesting because it doesn't have a lot of the programs that are in the more recent climate action plans. And I'll identify which ones those are. The plan was developed to be consistent with the state goal that's enshrined in Senate Bill 32, and that's to reduce emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And when you look at the plan, and if we implement all of the actions at the rates and at the full impact that we're expecting, emissions would be reduced 49% below 1990 levels by 2030. In 2020, again, you were 28% below the 1990 level. So making very good progress towards that 49% level, but still, 10 years to go. There's still a lot of work to go. So in the transportation, as you probably noticed, most of those emissions reductions come from electric vehicles. There are some, a lot of state initiatives around EVs, a lot of pretty aggressive goals. The state goal is to have 5 million EVs on the road by 2030. That would be 13% of all registered vehicles. There's also, you've probably heard about the governor's executive order, which is to require all new passenger vehicles sold in California to be zero emission by 2035. Not a law yet, but the state is trying to work on that. And then, so we see that Marin County has a really high EV adoption rate. We're actually the second highest in the state. We're just behind Santa Clara County. And by the end of 2021, about 6% of automobiles registered in Marin County were ZEVs. So ZEVs include electric vehicles, any plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, as well as fuel cell vehicles. We have very few of those, but they are counted. And at the end of 2021, 7.3% of registered vehicles in Corte Madera were ZEVs. So it's a little higher than the Marin County overall registration rate. The cap target is for 25% of passenger vehicles to be zero emission vehicles. It's not just Corte Madera vehicles, by the way. This really is a county-wide number, because when we're counting this, we're also counting anybody who lives who lives in Marin County and travels to Corte Madera for shopping or for work, et cetera, or school, whatever. So, so it is a county-wide goal. It's probably one of the lower goals when you look at the other caps that have been adopted. The county's goal, for example, is 45%, which is pretty aggressive. 25% may actually be achievable by 2030. So there are a lot of actions in the climate action plan about how to get there. Some of the more important ones, I think, are requiring multifamily EV chargers and EV ready parking spaces, especially because, as you probably know, with your housing element, there's the town is making room for 725 new housing units. And since you're going to have new housing, making that housing ready to have EVs for all of the tenants and owners is kind of a pretty important thing. Also, just installing more public EV chargers. There really aren't a lot of EV chargers in Corte Madera. There are a lot of programs, again, to increase walking and biking, supporting safe routes to school, working with Marine Transit to expand the ridership, also electrify the town fleet. So I'm kind of going out quickly over these so we can wrap it up. In the energy efficiency and renewable energy sector, again, I mentioned that electricity is already clean and it's going to get cleaner. PV installation is growing. So here the real opportunity is and the programs are around supporting solar installation and also adopting green building reach codes. So the newer caps have ordinances. Your cap is referencing a green building reach code that Marin County had adopted, and some of the other towns like Mill Valley did. I think, forget who else, maybe it was Larkspur, which was to have a preference for all electric buildings, but also to provide some mixed fuel options. At this point, all of the cities and towns in the county are looking at, they're working together to draft an ordinance that would just ban all natural gas from buildings and make them all require all electric. And that would be for residential and non-residential. And this would happen with the new building code, which goes into effect in January of next year. So that is a program that's in all of the other caps, but not in yours. And then there's also another program in other caps to require electric appliances to be installed when natural gas appliances and heating systems burn out. And so that's not something that we're looking at doing right away, but that's something that will need to happen if we're going to meet our 2030 goals for sure. Waste reduction, there is a state law called Senate Bill 1383, and the goal of that is to divert 75% of organic material from the landfill by 2025. So the town is already working with the waste hauler to implement this. There is, so it's all of the businesses and residents have this available to them. It's really about getting people to actually use their green can and compost their organic waste. The newer caps also have a program for a reusable foodware ordinance. You've probably heard about this. I don't know if you're working on this in Corte Madera, but the county has been driving it. They've actually adopted it. And then there's an opportunity for all the cities and towns that adopt the identical ordinance that the county will do the enforcement for the town and do the outreach and education. So that's actually a really big benefit to the town to do it. This ordinance requires different food establishments to provide reusable foodware and rather than disposable foodware. And then also for takeout, there's that it's compostable. And there are some exceptions, but that's an important thing that's happening right now. There are other cap sections that I'm not going to go into because of time constraints here, but there are sections on water and wastewater, natural systems sequestration, climate change adaptation, and implementation and monitoring of the climate action plan. So quickly to kind of wrap up, here's my recommended near-term actions for you. There's 8 of them, and I already really talked a lot about them, but the first 2 are this opportunity to kind of do these reach codes now, especially before those 725 new houses are built. And so that the first one is to require all electric buildings, both residential and non-residential. So again, this ordinance is being drafted now, and it would be something that could be brought to your council in the end of this year, probably in the fall, and it would have to be adopted so that it goes into effect January 1st. Also, a green building reach code that would require all new multifamily development to have 1 EV ready space per unit, and as well as additional fast chargers for the public and for visitors. So an EV ready space can just be a 220 volt receptacle that the tenant could, or the owner could purchase an EV charger and plug it into the wall. So it's ready to go. So that would be an important thing to do. Another thing And I've referenced like some caps. They're some of them are not, I'm fudging a little bit here, but they're the closest I could get to what's in your climate action plan in some cases. Another one, we know that e-bikes have really taken off. The problem with using them for transportation is that they get stolen really easily and they're very expensive to insure. So having secure e-bike parking, especially as you're redeveloping shopping centers, and I know that the town is looking at shopping centers for, as housing sites. So requiring secure e-bike parking would be really helpful in getting people to use their bikes when they're traveling, when they're going out shopping. Number 4 is an EV acceleration strategy. MCEP has been working on this along with the Transportation Authority of Marin to develop this countywide strategy. It will be released this fall, and your committee could take a look at this and then make a recommendation or give some support. I understand you're not making recommendations, but give some support to the council when they take a look at it for them to adopt it. Number 5 is an electric landscape and small equipment ordinance. I don't know if you guys are already looking at this, but a lot of the cities and towns in Marin are, and this would ban gas-powered electric leaf blowers, but also other small equipment as well. And so that they have to be all electric. The data shows that most residents at this point are using electric landscape equipment. It's just the commercial users that are still using gas. So a lot of the cities and towns are putting together programs where they provide rebates for commercial users so that they can afford to go and buy new or incentivize them, I should say, to go out and buy new equipment. The reusable foodware ordinance I already talked about. The next one is resilient neighborhoods. Some of you might be familiar with this program. It's a Marin County program that's run by Tamara Peters. She's been doing this for several years, and MCEP has been supporting them. And we just got a budget allocation, a big one, for resilient neighborhoods, where we're going to be providing them with about half of their budget annually going forward. So we're big believers in this program. They educate households and on everything about climate related, and they do a carbon footprint assessment in the beginning of the program. They share all of their resources and tactics to reduce your emissions and get people, motivate them to actually sign up and commit to taking these actions. So something that the committee could do is help to get people to sign up for this program. That would be really great. And then finally, I heard you talk something about updating your climate action page, which I couldn't actually find on the website, but I think there's a big opportunity here to just use that website and to provide information and links. And there are so many great programs out there, like Electrify Marin and Drive Clean Marin just did a big program, a big push with EV drive events and webinars. And there's just so much information out there. If you're just providing those links and pushing that information out, not just on your website, but you could also use the town's newsletter. I know that is very effective in getting, in reaching people. Also social media channels like Nextdoor, handouts. I think you could probably come up with a long list of things that you could do to help do outreach and educate the community. So thank you for listening to all of that. I am happy to answer any questions, and I will end the slideshow here. So I can bring it back if anybody wants to look at anything in particular.
Questions?
Christine, was that package, was that in our packet, or do we have access to your slide deck?
I don't know. I don't believe it was in your, no, I couldn't have been because I just did it today.
I'll provide that, Dave.
And I'm happy to, I'll send it out. Yeah. And you can also, I don't know if he distributed the greenhouse gas inventory report, but that's available also, which he could distribute to you as well.
That would be great. We'll do that. Other questions?
No? Well, got you out of here by 6 o'clock, it looks like.
Nope.
One thing, I noticed that you talk about ordinances for commercial businesses to reduce landscape gas emissions, but with their equipment. But have you considered having commercial buildings have no lawns, or having some way the town can ask for more natives and less traditionally water using plant material?
Yeah, that's a really important thing. Mostly the Marin Municipal Water District regulates that. There are water efficient landscape requirements. They're pretty stringent at this point. And so typically, I assume this is how Corte Madera does it, but a jurisdiction, when they get a new project, a new development project, they forward it to MMWD, who does all of this. It's pretty complicated calculations to come up with a water budget. And so MMWD really usually takes the major role in that.
Okay.
I think the answer was in new development. Yes, it's quite
Yeah.
restrictive. It's difficult to put a lawn in.
I see a lot of existing lawns.
Exactly. And MOWD does have programs to incentivize people and give them money for the change out in landscaping. And again, these are all things the town can promote, and to your public. Other questions for Christine? I know this was a lot to take in quickly.
Sorry, and I talked very fast, I know.
But your cap will essentially be your Bible going forward. So you'll need to familiarize yourself with it as time goes on. Other questions? All right. Thanks, Christine. We may be getting back to you, and I'll pass along your presentations.
Very good.
Thanks so much.
Sure. Bye, everybody.
Okay. And let me just put the agenda back up real quick. Okay, so the last item was future agenda items, and let me go to the next slide here. There we go. So a couple of things Christine mentioned. So just looking ahead to the fall, there's two things that I think you'll want to be prepared for. One is, again, this green building ordinance, the REACH code, that's coming down this fall that you'll need to be dealing with. The council will have to take action. So that's one thing to be looking forward to. And the other is the Marine Green Home Tour. For the first time, we'll have a green home tour. We are now soliciting homes to preview and to videotape. And so that's going to occur in early October. So that will be another opportunity for you to, again, push out information to the public about that green home tour, which will really give people a lot of great ideas for what they can do in terms of retrofitting their homes. But looking ahead, my thinking with the new committee is that the first couple of meetings are going to be primarily educational, just to get you grounded in terms of what is out there in terms of your own plans and who else is operating in this space. Because I guess there's two things I would really recommend that the committee seriously think about. And one is focusing your efforts. You will probably get a lot of requests from members of the public or nonprofits or organizations for you to take on issues that they hold dear. So you will really need, I think, later this fall to focus on what your work program will be and establish that and try your best to stick to it. Because again, there is so much that can be done, but you're really going to want to prioritize the things that have the most likelihood of having the biggest impact and the ones that you can really manage to take on time-wise and effort-wise. And the other thing I'd really recommend is to think about collaboration. A number of Marin jurisdictions now have similar commissions or committees to you. A number of the cities are now hiring staff members to assist their committees and really make a major push on implementation of these measures. And so all of that is going to create a lot of energy in the next year or two. And there's also a lot of nonprofits that are working in this sector. So again, what we don't want to do is recreate the wheel. We really want to, take what we can that's best out there and communicate it to your public, and really use that collaboration to advance your implementation. So those are a couple of things I think you want to keep in mind. So looking ahead, unless I hear objections, the idea would be for the next meeting on August 17th to have a presentation from Marin Can. This was Drawdown Marin previously. It's now been rebranded as Marin Can. And again, I think it's important to think about what's the county doing in terms of programs and implementation, and which are programs that you might be able to piggyback on and help implement as well. So I think that's important to hear from the county. And then here at Corte Madera, the Public Works Department had an adaptation assessment done. So your committee is also responsible for future work on adaptation, not just reducing emissions, but also adapting to what we're going to experience. And so I think it's important that the Public Works Director present to you what the adaptation assessment is and really what the next steps are. That was a first step, but there's a lot of work to be done. And so I think that's important information. And then in September, we would, I think, have a presentation from the county on this draft green building reach code, because again, that's going to probably be coming to the council in October or November. And we can have Chris Ragland here, the building official from town as well, because that's going to be a very important decision-making point this fall. Christine mentioned resilient neighborhoods. I think you should hear about that program. It's really, it changes a lot of hearts and minds, and it really creates a sense of community among participants. And so they've had a lot of success, and now they have additional funding so they can do even more. And then lastly, the Transportation Authority of Marin, they're the ones responsible for the funding of electric vehicle programs. And since EVs are such a, since transportation is such a high percentage of your emissions, I think it's important to hear what TAM has in mind in terms of trying to tackle that. And then hopefully by October meeting, we'll be ready to start having the committee really prioritize what you want to take on. And hopefully by that point, you may have your new climate action coordinator on board to help with that process. So is there anything that is missing here that you think you would like to be dealing with in the next couple of meetings?
Quick question. The ad hoc group over the last couple of years has actually worked on the prioritization of short and long term. So how would you suggest we bring in the work that has been done into this new process? I
would suggest, again, I think we should take the majority of our October meeting to really delve into prioritization. And yes, absolutely, the prior work should help direct those efforts as well. And so again, the prior working group might want to put together some sort of a statement or a summary of the work that they've done, and then we can share that with the whole. Other suggestions for future meeting topics, again, really near term in the next couple of meetings. Anything else that we might want to educate ourselves or tackle?
One thing, on June 6th, the Marin Civil Grand Jury put out a pretty robust report. And the grand jury doesn't always go as deep as this particular one. It's really well written, well researched, and all of the jurisdictions in the county, all 12, have to respond by September 6th. So it is focused on actually a lot of things that are happening around climate change and collaborative efforts, including this most recent initiative that is engaging, I think, almost all of the jurisdictions to work collaboratively and work on the REACH code together. So if we could share that among the committee members, that's something that Rebecca could do or you could do?
I'll send that out.
Okay,
Sure.
So yeah, I think sharing that, and then I would add that to the August 17th meeting, and then for discussion and perhaps a recommendation, before September 6th, that we could get that to the council, or perhaps staff has already worked on that and doesn't need more input, but just throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, my understanding is that there's actually amongst all the county jurisdictions and agencies that are required to respond to that grand jury report. They are working on, since it was talking about collaboration in all of the jurisdictions, to really respond collaboratively on this, that they're actually creating a response that's a joint response, essentially, through essentially the reach code group that's working on the model ordinance. And so my understanding is they're working on the draft now. So I'm not exactly sure of the timing of when they're actually ready to have a draft response, but I would recommend that if in fact a response is ready by the 17th, we could bring it to this committee for review before it goes to the council. My only concern is looking at the date. I think it was September 6th is the required response date, which would be the first council meeting, same night as the council meeting. Their only other council meeting is August 16th. So it's going to be the day before. And so obviously the council ultimately is the one that's going to have to approve a response and send it back to the civil grand jury. So timing of it, we'll work on that, but I think that would be appropriate if the timing works.
Well, as was mentioned earlier, just if, as Bob said, this next couple of meetings could be educational, and I think the grand jury report being distributed ASAP, and then whenever that draft response is done, just as a point of reference for the
Sure,
group.
I'll be happy to send that out.
That's great. Thank you.
And then for the next meeting, also we'll elect the chair and vice chair. So be thinking about that and lobbying, but not in violation of the Brown Act. And Dave, I'll mention to you that the idea was to nominate the people that weren't at the meeting, but we've held off. So, and then also discussion about start thinking about whether or not you think that there are any ad hoc committees that you want to establish, like I say, working on the website or whatever. But we can get those established and get them working. That's all I have.
So do I have to do this?
Yeah, you've always wanted to.
No, not at all. So we are adjourned. Thank you all for this, for being here, either live or via Zoom. And on we go, onward. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Thank you.